on Tuesday. I can like 6 or something. Yeah. We talked to a guy.
I don't like pin
Right. I saw your note there about 45 minutes. Yeah. He was actually really.
All right, I think we're gonna start here. Hey Heath.
My apologies. It was on my calendar at 5:30. So
No worries at all. We got a classroom of people here, so if you're ready, I'm just gonna hand it over to you. I know you said you might have some slides or something, so go ahead.
well, you told me just to answer some questions, so I can throw slides up, but I'm happy to just talk through and not bore
Okay,
you guys with
awesome.
slides.
No worries. If you just want to share a little bit about your educational background and then anything you want to share like personally with us.
That sounds great. So I can't see everyone in the class, but my apologies for not being there in person. Really excited to speak to all of you this evening. Hopefully I can provide just a little bit of background, perspective, answer some questions, but I'd love to get a little bit of live discussion, question and answers with you as well. So just a little bit about me personally. So Heath Holtz, I'm currently the Chief Operations and Supply Chain Officer here at Kohler Company. A little bit of personally, I'm originally from Ohio. I always joke that I'd usually show the picture of it on Google Maps because it's a small town. I think it listed at 330 people. So no, I didn't have a stoplight. I had 4 stop signs and a post office, and I had to drive 20 minutes to get anywhere. And the first time I ever got on an airplane was when I was 18, heading to college. So really small town. So originally from Ohio, and then personally married for 25 years. Just a couple weeks ago, we had our 25th anniversary to Haley, who I met in Georgia. And I have 2 daughters. I have a 14-year-old who's a freshman in high school, and my oldest, Sydney, is a senior who is 17. Both of them are gymnasts, and so we do a lot of traveling during this time of year. So we do a lot of traveling all over. Last weekend I was in Orlando while my wife was in Dallas. Each of them at different gymnastics meets. Also, just a little personally, because I think it's important when I'll talk a little bit about work-life balance and those sort of things. I love to do. I'm a golfer now. I like to golf a lot. I boat. Chloe's dad and I have done a little wake surfing together, so I like to do that. And I also I get different passions. So I've done cycling. I've done the coast to coast in England, where we went from the west coast to the east coast twice. I'm a runner. I've done ran 7 marathons. Just got into a passion of running, so I started running different marathons all across the U.S. and a couple internationally. So that's a bit about me personally. I think academic background, I think it was one of the questions that was asked as well. So I did my undergrad at United States Air Force Academy. My degree was in operations research. I was selected out of the Air Force Academy to go and get my master's, and I did my master's at Georgia Tech in operations research. After I did 6 years in the military, I wanted to transition into the civilian sector, into business, and I thought one of the best ways to do that was to go back and do a business degree. I was really passionate about operations, so I went back and got 2 more masters. I got a master's from MIT in engineering systems, and then I got my MBA from the Sloan School while I was there as well. So a little bit about my academic background as well as my personal background.
Awesome, thanks. The next kind of thing I wanted to ask you is there's a lot of seniors and juniors here, and we're going to be starting our careers pretty soon. So obviously you've had a lot of different roles and you're in a pretty big role now. So kind of how did you get to where you are, and kind of what's your story there?
Well, it's a long. I was reflecting on my career and I realized how old I was. So I'll start there, and then I started telling the stories of how things are tied together. But there is a little bit of a story that I I tried to be thoughtful in each role that I took that built off of a strength, but expanded into a different area. And ideally taking a role that touched large portions of the business so you can learn a lot about the different portions of the business that you were in. So, I mentioned that I was in the Air Force first. I did 2 assignments in the Air Force. I did some strategic planning, kind of procurement. What should we buy and when to support the United States Air Force? Um, I I also went back to the Air Force Academy and taught. So I was a math professor for a couple of years, which was great. That taught me a lot more about, presentation, communicating ideas, and working with the students, but also being able to build a little bit more technical acumen in various areas, because I think, the analytical applications throughout your career, you'll see them all the time. So it was really good to go back and do that, because communicating and teaching it means you have to understand it yourself. And I surprisingly used that quite a bit throughout my career. Once I went through grad school at MIT, the largest portion of my career was at Nissan, North America and globally. Just a couple of the roles that I can walk a little bit through, because I made the comment about connecting different roles together. Let me kind of walk through some of those. I'm sorry if I'm going to bore you, but I'll do my best to entertain, like to try to tell the story of the different roles. So when I first joined Nissan, I took a role in what they called distribution, vehicle distribution. So imagine you're working for an automotive company. Whatever you plan to build, you're going to sell to dealerships, and the dealerships are going to sell to customers. Well, as an automotive company, you needed to determine which regions you were going to provide them to. So where were you going to distribute them? And then also, how should you configure the vehicles that would sell the best and be the best from a retail perspective with consumers who were interested in buying? So the first role that I did was that distribution job. So we determined, looking at the production that was coming up, how should we build them, what specs, what colors, what are all of those sort of things, to be able to estimate so you could have the long lead time of parts coming in. And then we would determine which regions got which cars. So which do you send to the Southeast, to the Northwest, to the Midwest? And I did that role. And what I would say about the pieces of that is I had to work with the manufacturing teams to understand what I could change, what parts to do. But then I also had to work with the sales teams to see which regions were very hot, which ones do they actually want different cars, different specs. So it's a way to learn a lot about the business in a short period of time. After that, I moved into what was called car flow, kind of, if you've supply chain people out there, the sales and operations planning process. So we looked at, over the next 12 months, what do we anticipate the retail to be at the dealership? So how much inventory should we have in our dealerships of which vehicles? How much, in order to do that, how much wholesale did we need to do? What production do we need to do? How much do we need to source in all of our different plants, both in the US, or I should say in the US and Mexico, and in Japan, and other import sources that we had. So it was really putting together the sales and operations planning process and understanding how much inventory to have. And that was fantastic, because you got the opportunity to learn about incentives and understanding which vehicles to plan, what market share that we were gaining, how did we engage with our retailers, started to work globally with different plants in Mexico and Japan, started to develop a little bit of network, and then started to learn more and more about the manufacturing processes as it went through. So it was a fantastic learning experience. After that, I kind of jumped and did something quite different as I went into procurement and sourcing. So I knew nothing about contracts, writing contracts and terms. But I moved into a role where I was responsible for logistics purchasing for North America. So all of our agreements with UPS or with FedEx or truckload carriers, warehouses. So we went through and developed the contracts, negotiated the contracts, terms and conditions, and set those up for the North American market. I also got to work in Mexico, so it was different working with some of the Mexican suppliers as well, and understanding their logistics network and how to support that. After I wrote all the contracts, then they made me responsible for running the region. So all the bad deals that I just negotiated, I was then responsible for making sure that I did a good job with those. So I moved into a role as a director of logistics. So I was actually running all of the North American logistics. So bringing parts to the plants, shipping finished vehicles to the dealerships, service parts, delivering those to the dealerships, and running the port operations where we had import vehicles that were coming in as well. So I did that for about 3 years, and then they asked me to move to Japan. And I moved me and my family to Japan at that point in time, and I was responsible for logistics engineering and strategy. So in that role, I basically looked at all new vehicles that we were going to produce and say, how much do we anticipate the logistics costs to be? And then what can we do to improve that to make the vehicle itself more profitable, or to look at ways of reducing and improve the sustainability by reducing the amount of miles that it would take to ship, or how much truck space that it would take. So we evaluated things like size of parts, sourcing of parts, size of vehicle, and did all the engineering for all the new models globally. So my team was responsible for the China market and Japanese market and Latin America, Europe, and we approved all those new models as they came through. After being there for only a year, I was supposed to be there for 3 years, they moved us to Europe, moved to the UK, and was the vice president for supply chain in Europe. And at that time, so basically ran the supply chain out of the lived in the UK, but I had a team in Spain, or two teams in Spain. I had a team in Paris, France. We had our headquarters in Geneva, and then I had a team in St. Petersburg, Russia. And we were responsible for the supply chain for all of that, for that region. So that included, when I talked about the logistics portion of bringing everything in, producing and shipping, but in addition to that was running the plants and making sure that we had responsibility for scheduling the plants, making sure we built the right amount. Do we have the right inventory throughout the network to support that? Loved that job. It was a great personal experience and professional experience. We did it for about 3.5 years. And then I moved back to Nissan North America and ran the vehicle plant. So this plant was 6 million square feet. We had about 8,000 team members in that location, and we produced a vehicle every 30 seconds. So it was actually the largest vehicle plant in North America. And it was tremendous responsibility. Love that. So it's operationally running this plant day to day. It was a 3-shift operation, so we ran pretty much 24/7, and responsible for kind of the quality of the vehicles that are produced, the volumes, all of those sort of things. And then my last role at Nissan was Senior Vice President, Manufacturing, Supply Chain, and Purchasing. So just kind of think for North America. So just think the kind of Chief Operating Officer for North America. Everything from supplying the parts to shipping them to producing them and distributing those within North America. So after being in automotive for 14 years, I decided that I would want to do a little bit different and look for a challenge in a different industry. And that's when I joined Target. And I spent 4 years working at Target, running their global supply chain logistics operations. So all the Target's a very large company. We had over 50 warehouses and distribution centers and fulfillment centers, and I had responsibility for running all of those. We had about 60,000 team members, and obviously shipping to support replenishment to stores, but then having the responsibility of shipping direct to guests at home or to a customer directly to your home if you order something that was online. And then I had this, after doing that for 4 years, I had this opportunity and got a call here at Kohler and to become the Chief Operations and Supply Chain Officer. So I have responsibility for the sourcing, here, the transportation, our 50 manufacturing plants across the globe, and then distributing to either our wholesale customers or retail customers, as well as our environmental health and safety responsibilities here, and of course a finance team and an HR team to support that as well. So sorry if I took too long, but I wanted to give you a little bit of context, and hopefully I wasn't too foreign with some of the terminology.
No, that was awesome. Thanks for sharing that with us. You got a lot of knowledge, I'm sure, from all those different roles. Does anyone have any questions? Otherwise, I can move on to my other questions I have for him. No? Okay. So you just kind of walked us through a ton of different projects that you worked on. So what is the coolest project that you worked on? And then what is the project that you're most proud of?
This is a great question. I was trying to think of something that you guys would actually think was cool and not just me. But I would say, honestly, the coolest projects I worked on is I was a part of this site selection for a plant in Brazil. And what was so cool about it is, and the automotive industry plants are, in a lot of companies are huge investments. They're billion-dollar investments, so they're significant. And most new buildings are now 500 million, 600 million to invest. So being a part of building a new plant is just a really cool thing to be able to do. The best part about this project is we got to pick where to build it too. So we got to fly all over different areas of Brazil and look at the locations and do an assessment on, is this a good place to build a plant? How close is it to your customer base? How would you staff it? Would there be interest in people moving to this area to be able to support it, to work in the plant? What the environmental impact be? All of the full assessment. And I just learned so much, one, about the country, and a gracious country that it is, and the people that I got to work with, but also just the whole thought process and the engagement with the local governments, the engagement of what it all takes to really put all of this together. It was a really cool project to work on. The one I would say I was the most proud of is probably most recently at Target. For those of you who order anything online, Target prides themselves in that 90% of the population lives within about 10 miles of a Target. So when you order something online, they use their stores as hubs. So if it's available in the store, a store team member actually goes out, shops, picks it, they pack it, and then they ship it from the store. Well, one of the ways, typically the way they would ship it is they give it to UPS or they give it to FedEx, or other carriers. In this case, the project was so cool as we created our own last mile network. So for those of you who are Instacart or Shipt, Target owns Shipt, and has Shipt shoppers. Well, we use Shipt shoppers to be Shipt drivers. And when you place an order online in certain markets, we build a sortation center. So we got to build a building, create a new team with the Shipt shoppers. And when an order gets created, they pack it in the store. We go pick it up. We take it into a sortation center, sort it out, make routes for these Shipt shoppers, and they drive up and they deliver them to your home in their personal vehicles. It's faster than using standard carriers. It's less expensive and it's less impactful because of less miles that are driven on the environment as well. So it was just a really cool project to work on, but it was something you're really proud of to be able to see that. And we end up building out 10 sortation centers. I think there's one more that's coming this year. So I have 11 sortation centers across the United States.
Awesome. Especially since we're moving to such an e-commerce world, like right around COVID too, I'm sure that was super helpful to Target having that kind of as an option.
Yeah, it was definitely increased in terms of the demand, and it gave a very fast, reliable service to those who ordered online. You could get it next day and get that next day capability.
Well, I have some questions kind of just after hearing you talk about your past roles and stuff. So what was the communication like when you were in the UK and you said you were working with teams kind of all around Europe? So how does that kind of work when you're not all in like one location together?
Yeah, I'd say, you know, I'll take a step back, and one of the things that they ask, because it's such a good question, is when the pandemic hit, they said, the comment was someone called me, I think it was to do an article, and they asked, what is it like to live in a virtual world? And the thought to me was, I've lived and managed multi-sites for the majority of my career. It's been no different. We've lived virtual management, and that's essentially what it was like. It's no different than what we're doing right now. This is the way that we interacted with the teams in Europe. So I did travel a lot and interact with them. I hit every site, those locations I mentioned, every month. So I would basically, one week I would be in Russia for a couple days, and then I go from there to Spain and visit the Barcelona plant, and I'd come back. The next week I would go down to France and Paris, and I'd spend a few days there with the team in person. And then I'd come back. I'd spend a week in the UK with the team that was there. And then the last week of the month, we do our management reviews in Geneva. So I'd fly to Geneva. That was kind of the way of working, but all of the project approvals were, they were, we were interacting with projects just like this. It wasn't Zoom, but we were doing the video conference almost for all of those. Now you're smiling because it sounds pretty rough going to Paris and Barcelona and Geneva and St. Petersburg every month. I assume that's the case.
Yeah, totally.
Well, in 3.5 years, I traveled over 450 days. So it was fun for a while, and then it got a little long after a while. I'm not gonna lie.
How did you balance that with like your personal life, like having kids and that whole?
Are you asking me, or you probably better ask my wife? So Haley probably give you a different answer. It's work-life balance to me is it's quantity of time, or it's quality of time, not quantity of time. I think everybody knows you can sit in a room with somebody 24 hours and not talk to them, or sit on your phones and not engage, and it doesn't matter that you're present. You have to physically and mentally be present, or mentally be present and engaged. So we focused a lot to balance is I was present. I changed my hobbies. I didn't do, people say, why didn't you golf when you lived in the UK? I didn't, because my weekends were devoted for my family. And I knew I was traveling during the week, so I was there and there with my daughters. My daughters were fairly young at that point in time. So I made sure that we had quality time together, and we did a lot of fun things around the UK. We traveled quite a bit within Europe, and that's when they started their gymnastics. So we were traveling around the UK with their gymnastics as well. So that's the one thing I would say is it's not a scorecard about how many hours you're with somebody if you're not really present. So I always want to make sure that I was present with my family as well, and did, when I was working there, I also made sure I got home in a time to be able to spend time with the kids as well. And I was always the one, when I was there, picking them up for practice and making sure I had one-on-one time with my daughters in the car.
Awesome. All right, well, my next question is, what are your top 3 priorities in your day-to-day? And how have they kind of changed?
It's really hard when I think of like top priorities, because each week you walk into something different. Each day, the night before, I'll look and say, here are the things I got to focus on. But I made it a little bit more general when I think about this. One is obviously with a large team, and we've got about 30,000 associates across the globe. The first thing you worry about is safety. Top priority for me is the safety of the team, and making sure that each and every person, especially in manufacturing operations, leaves home, or leaves work the same way that they arrived at work, healthy, both mentally and physically, in terms of how they feel and how they leave, and that we create a good culture and environment that they're a part of. and that's always been my top priority. Um, I would say the other thing is, a top priority is when you're a customer centric brand or a customer centric company, you also worry about the quality of the services that you provide, the quality of the work that you do, because if you don't have a customer that's interested in what you do and your product and excited about your product, you don't have a business. So if you don't have a team and you don't have a customer, you don't have a business. So those are the top couple of priorities. And I would say the thing is you moved in different roles and elevated in different roles. The third thing is just being cognizant of your priority is making sure your vision is always clear. Where do you want to go? You don't get an opportunity to interact with every one of your team when you have a large team. So if they know where you're going and why you're going there and the vision of what you're trying to accomplish within your function, then they are empowered to do the work that they need to in service of that vision. So I think it's extremely important for me, and priorities is making sure that's clear each and every day with everybody that I interact with.
Awesome. The next question that I have is, what are the biggest lessons that you have learned throughout your career?
I have a long list of lessons that I've learned from mistakes that I've made. I would say there's just a couple of things, and I'll have to bore you with a couple small stories. But I talked about my experience moving to the UK, and when I moved to the UK, I was promoted to vice president. I was a pretty young vice president, and I was also moving into a region that was really high quality or high caliber of talent, and I was moving in higher level and younger than most of them that were there. So what happened was I wanted to prove that I was deserving of the position and I was smart. I was like, I'm convinced I'm going to show them I'm smart enough to be able to do this job. So I jumped right in, was all business, and asked questions and jumped in and learned learned the market, learned the data, learned the team, did all of those sort of things. And about 2 or 3 months in, I started doing one-on-ones with various people who reported to me in my organization. And I asked them, okay, start, stop, continue. What should I start? What should I stop? What should I continue? And what general feedback they had for me. Well, the first comment was, Heath, you don't have any personality. And they said, you're robotic. And I didn't have it. So this happened to come from the guy that they called Two Brains, who they also thought had no personality. So when he tells you have no personality, it's zero. And it was pretty impactful, because what it taught me is that no matter how, you have to engage with the team and you have to meet the team where you're at. And in different markets, it meant different things. So how I engaged, so over that period of time, I learned these are the things I needed to do in the UK to get to know the team, to make sure that I took time, let your guard down, let them know you personally, know who you are as a person. That allows you to be more effective in the work that you do. It doesn't matter how smart you are or how well you know your business or how much experience that you have. If you can't connect and motivate a team, you can't effectively do your job. So that was one thing that stuck with me, like a lesson that I've learned over a period of time, that where I made a mistake and then I learned from it. One other small story, sorry to bore you with these, but when I was running the manufacturing plant too, so like I mentioned, it was a large plant with a lot of team members that were working in the facility. And I was out on the plant floor and I was walking, and obviously I was thinking about something, and I was so just concentrated on doing like whatever it was. And I can't even remember what I was thinking about, but I was walking along, and this manager who worked in my team in the plant turned and looked at me and he said, "Hey, Heath." And I said, "Yeah, what's going on, Steve? What do you want?" And he turned around and he said, "It doesn't hurt to smile." And and then I realized that as a plant manager responsible for this entire building, that how I showed up and how I was interacting each day was translated by what how I said in a meeting, how I was standing there, whether I smiled, whether I engaged, made eye contact, and it just goes to show that like being present, making that eye contact, just saying hello can go a long way to have an impact on what the team does. So I'd say, just a couple small things. It probably doesn't seem as impactful to a lot of you, but it does make a big difference to a team, especially when you lead teams. Letting your guard down, being personal, making sure you're smiling and you're engaging with the team, and the motivation goes a long way to make sure that they deliver the results that you want the team to be able to deliver.
Totally. I'm kind of going off that first story that you were telling. Sounds like you're kind of dealing with some imposter syndrome, being so young in such a high role. So kind of how have you dealt with imposter syndrome? Because I know I've definitely dealt with it, so it's tough to handle. So what is some advice you have when someone's dealing with imposter syndrome?
Yeah, I think the first thing is realize that I don't. A lot of people feel that way. They just don't say it. So first thing, be comfortable that you're not the only one. I wish I could attribute it to the CEO who said that, but said this. But there was a CEO who said I woke up every day afraid they would figure me out, meaning afraid that they figure out I wasn't qualified to be the CEO. And I do think that personally, having that internal drive to prove is great, but not to a point that it delivers any self-doubt. Um, in order to feel, you know, your job in the role is not to know everything. Your job in the role is to ask the right questions, to be able to provide direction and guidance. And the reason you were brought into a particular role, the thing that I had to realize is the way that I was going to engage, lead, um, interact with the team. And that's what I needed to have the expertise in. I didn't need to have the expertise in all this other stuff that I was going after. So I would just say that recognize everybody. There's a lot of people who feel that way, even if they don't say it. Some of the best people have felt that way. Feel confident that you should be in that role because you were selected for that role. You've likely earned that position to be in. And then also know that where can you provide value. Give yourself a little bit of wins along the way, and then you start to feel more and more comfortable, as you said, in those positions. But I can say this even today. There's days that I wake up and I'm like, oh, there's so much going on. I don't know how I'm going to be able to get through all of this. It just happens. It happens to everyone naturally. You just take your deep breath, be balanced with what's going on, and try to take one step forward each day and get a little bit better.
Awesome. The next thing I have is what is or was like the best thing you did to help with your career development, either like early on in your career or now, or has it kind of been similar throughout your whole career?
I would say early on, being I mentioned a little along the way, I was very fortunate with the roles that I had, that I stepped into a role that touched a lot of other areas. So I was able to learn a lot of new areas as I was doing the job that I felt comfortable doing. So I would say, some of the things I've learned from a career development is being intentional about the roles that you go into and what can you learn from those roles. And also don't be afraid to take a little bit of a leap into something that may make you a little bit uncomfortable. I mentioned that I had no commercial experience, and I ran in and, okay, now you're responsible for procurement. And I'm reading through contracts for the first time. There's language in the contracts I had no idea what it meant. I always have a little notebook. I even have it now that I go through and I write down everything I didn't understand from that day. And I go back at the end of the day and I do the research, and I'm a little bit smarter than I was, 24 hours before. So that's what I'd say from a career perspective is, try to find the right opportunities. Don't be afraid to stretch yourself into different roles. And then what can you learn each and every day, and recognize that you're gonna adapt, you're gonna grow into that role. I remember even having discussions earlier, like saying, I want to stay in this role a little bit longer. And people were saying, no, we need you to move here. And I would say, well, I don't quite understand everything. And they would say, just do it anyway. And I'm glad they did, because I was just hesitant. I was being more protective of that. And I learned a lot through those experiences. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you. The last thing I have before, if anyone has any other questions, what kind of post-college life advice do you have, if any?
My daughter doesn't listen to any of my advice now, either one of them. So I don't know if any of you guys will be interested in. I would say there's a couple things that I would say is, choose something that you're passionate about. Understand what gets you up and excited. You're going to be at work for a lot of times. A lot of your working hours, a lot of days that you're going to be there. So for college is, find a company you're passionate about, find a role that you're passionate about, find something that you're passionate about, because you're going to be there quite a bit. So I always talk if I go and make moves to companies, I need to be passionate about the brand. I need to be passionate about and the people that I work with, what's the culture like, make sure that I enjoy being there each and every day. And then obviously I'm very passionate about operations, supply chain, those areas. So I'm excited about what I do each and every day. So that's one thing I would say, post college or life, like find something you're passionate about and do that. The other thing is, I talk about passionate, but you should have a passion for something outside of work. I rotated. I was a runner there for a while. I cycled for a while. Now it's golf, or it's, surfing, or it's something that you can look forward to doing on the weekend, or something you look forward to doing at the end of the day. But also, more importantly, that it gets you away from work, because when you truly take a break, when you truly try to step away, it's usually when the best ideas come to you. And you feel much more refreshed. You feel so much more engaged. So that's the other thing I would say is, not only find passionate what you do at work, but then also find a passion outside of work to keep you balanced, to provide that balance.
Well, does anyone have any questions for Heath?
Yeah, I got one. So you said you've traveled around the world a lot. That's something that I've been wanting to do. After this summer, I'm going to go on a workaway program and go to the south of France for about 2 months is the plan right now. I was wondering what kind of things you've learned from traveling in all these different cultures, what you've learned from them, what's kind of different, and maybe some advice for going to other countries.
I'm glad you get to do that. It's going to be fascinating. It is truly the best experiences that I've had in my career when I reflect upon it. I mentioned when I was in Europe, being in the UK and France and all of that, but my France office had 31 people, but we had 17 different nationalities. And then what I would say from that is learn about others' cultures. When you're in a country, don't be afraid to learn what they enjoy doing, learn about the history, try their foods, do those sort of things to embrace yourself in the culture of the company or of the country, with the people that are around you, and learn quite a bit. So I gained a big appreciation for a lot of different cultures throughout the period of time. So the other thing I would say that gave me a lot more balance and understanding and working in global companies as well is you understand what their tendencies are. You have a better understanding of when there truly is an issue versus certain cultures are a little bit less direct. Others like to do it privately. Others like to engage after work, but don't like to engage during work, more personally. So being able to travel out there understands how you can meet individuals where they're at, and gives you a much better appreciation. And I think it just makes you much personally a more well-rounded individual as well. And you know, we talk about diversity, and you talk about inclusion. That diversity of thought, I've seen it in action with all the different cultures that were represented in the roles that I've been in, and some of the best ideas would come from those diverse thoughts and being able to challenge. And some of the most motivated teams were the most diverse teams that were there and provide that perspective. So I think it's just a great experience to learn. It's a great appreciation where you're at, and you come away with a different perspective, which will also make you a better individual, and also a better leader.
Thank you.
Anyone else have any questions? No? Okay, well, I don't think we have any more questions. So thank you so much, Heath, for joining us and giving us some insights and advice. You provided us with a lot of great information. So thank you.
Well, it's great to talk to everyone, and hopefully I can do this in person. I'd love to be able to answer other questions. It may be a little bit easier to do it than over the Zoom call. So
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
but thank you so much for the time, and best of luck to everyone, and really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.